Hey there, campers. Welcome back to another Lorcana video here on the Camp Legend channel. I am Ian, and of course I have with me my good friend Gibby. We have wrapped up pretty much the Ursula's Return season. Both of us managed to secure some cool Ursulas and whatnot at our various set championships. We're also unfortunately not able to make it out to Toronto, the only Lorcana challenge that is in this weird, kind of couple weeks of Bucky being eroded and still not using the new card. So we're just sort of fast forwarding ahead to the new stuff because Shimmering Skies got fully previewed. And we're super excited to be checking out some of those cards. And we figured what better to start with than the legendaries that everybody will be chasing down the first couple of weeks.
Start from the top. Let's go for the good stuff.
We're going to start with the good stuff. So we have put together a little tier list here, and we are going to do a too soon tier list on the legendary. So obviously this is our projections on what things are likely to be, not necessarily us. We don't have a crystal ball. We can't see perfectly into the future and know exactly what is going to be meta and what is not, but we are going to project based on our sort of expectations of the set and knowledge of the metagame. So I'm going to go ahead and share here. Boom, we have our tier list. I'm going to put the link to the tier list down in the description. So if you want to fill it out yourself and let us know, jump in the Discord and show us your tier list and tell us why we're wrong or why we're right. We'd certainly appreciate that too.
We love to hear when we're right.
We like it when we're right. So I'll sort of give you an overview of the way that I've sort of laid these tiers out. So at the top, we have S tier, which I'm calling meta defining. Things like Diablo, things like, the Beast, right? Emo Beast, Sad Beast, right? These are cards that are meta staples, right? Things that you're going to see all over the place. And Lucky Dime, right? That's a meta defining card. Below that, we've got meta relevant, right? So those are the cards that are in top tier decks, but maybe just like one, and maybe they are a tool that's used, but not something that is, that the entire strategy is based around. Think something like Maleficent Dragon, right? Great, powerful, legendary. It's really only used in Ruby Sapphire. And if it were to be banned all of a sudden, there would be replacements. The deck would exist without it, right? We have niche meta usage. That's where I'm sort of envisioning things that are like teched in here or there. It's a good card. Maybe it's a one of or a two of, right? It's got power. It's in meta lists, but it is, more of a niche card. And then down in C tier, we have rogue deck potential. These are the kinds of legendaries that you'll see, arguably you could say like, before it got solved and became a meta, defining card like Mufasa, people kind of assumed it would be in there, like, kind of fun. And then it eventually grew to be what I would call like meta relevant, right? So anything that really turns on like an archetypal deck that maybe isn't in that top tier, right? And then at the bottom, we have meme decks and binder fodder. The legendaries that are either like Gantu, completely unplayable, or maybe something, like people could argue about it, but maybe something like Alice Growing Girl, right? Very fun, has some cool things you can do with it, but really hasn't broken into the meta quite yet. So that's how I'm laying things out. And again, we're going to project what we think these legendaries are going to eventually fit into. So let's start in order. Let's go in order of the colors and everything. So first off, we have Mirabel. I'm just going to put it here until we rank it. We have Mirabel, Madrigal. Gibby, give us a little overview of Mirabel and what your initial impressions of this legendary are.
So Mirabel Madrigal is a 5-cost inkable legendary in Amber. 5 attack and 5 willpower. She quests for 5. They had to create a new symbol for her because they just couldn't fit that many diamonds on her page, on her card. So it's literally just the one little lore count, and then it's got the number 5 written inside of it. She's a Storyborn hero, and she's got that Madrigal tag. We figured that there was going to be more Madrigals coming when we saw the tag that they introduced in the last set. And her ability, not without my family, you can't play this character unless you have 5 or more characters in play. So it doesn't necessarily have to be Madrigals, but she just you have to have 5 or more characters in play, and then you can drop Mirabel. Where I think Mirabel kind of fits is maybe rogue deck potential. It is very hard to get 5 characters out without absolutely just losing your like so much tempo, basically doing nothing. I guess you could play like cards that are like on play effects, right, to try to like stall your opponent or like bounce your opponent's cards in the meantime while you're playing things, and then just keep everybody readied. But most decks have some sort of removal nowadays where it's, even if you keep your characters ready, they're going to be able to sing songs, or they're going to be able to use removal to try to keep those counts low enough. And who's to say, even if they don't just remove Mirabel once she's down, as you're going to be late enough in the game. Most removal tools in the late game aren't like locked to like being just removing like low cost stuff.
Right.
It's going to be Mirabel's clearly a finisher, right? But it's very tough to, I think it's going to be very tough to find a deck that consistently makes her work. So I'm struggling to find where she would be in the, like, be meta, but I think there's like a rogue deck potential of some sort of an aggro list that plays a lot of cheap characters or warded characters that Mirabel could fit into.
Yeah, the tough problem right now, and this is something that I've actually talked a lot of with some people in my locals about brooms. Like the struggle with brooms is that you have these ways to like, churn out a bunch of units cheap. I imagine we'll see a similar thing with the new dwarves package, right? Like, okay, you can get a bunch of these guys out cheap, but if they get board wiped, you can't refill your hand, right? Like these swarm archetypes, which are relying on lots of things being out on the board at the same time, they're very all in on that first wave of units actually living. And more importantly, you can't just sit on them and not let them do anything, because if you do that, you're giving your opponents time to, bring their ink count up to the point where they can, play board wipes. So I look at Mirabel and I say, I just don't know when you're going to be able to get 5 other characters on the board and do things with them before bringing her down. To me, I would classify this as binder fodder or meme deck, right? Something that you might take to locals to goof off with, but like not really ever take to a tournament. If you think that maybe we give her the benefit of the doubt and put her in C, that's fine. But I look at this and compare it to a card like Alice, Growing Girl, and Alice empowers other cards. It comes down cheaper. It can still quest for 5 and you start to realize, like, maybe if this quested for like 8 or 10, you might say, well, okay, this really is the payoff. Maybe it's the true payoff that, like, okay, getting 10 in one go is doable.
I can fall super far behind, and this is just that instant like gratification of like. But I agree with you. I think we keep it in D tier as like, this is a card that you pull off once or twice in like a weekly locals, and you're like, I did it, and then you're like, okay, time to put her back.
Right. And I think that, unfortunately, maybe she's a little bit better than like Gantu. This is the Gantu tier, really. But still, I just don't see her qualifying for any of the other categories. So
the Gantu can't use tier.
Flip side, we've got Prince Navin. Gibby, tell me about Prince Navin.
Prince Navin, ukulele player. He is a 4-cost amber uninkable. 3 attack, 3 willpower. Storyborn hero Prince, quest for 2. Singer 6. Okay, so he's a 4-cost unit that sings for 6. We like things that can sing for high. It's beautiful, no? Is his ability. I tried to do the frog voice. It's beautiful, no? When you play this character, you may play a song with cost 6 or less for free. So if you've got anything, you're obviously, if you're gonna put songs in your hand, or songs in your deck, they're gonna be useful to whatever kind of deck you're playing. Amber is no short of having useful songs, or the archetype of Amber Steel songs is one that's already pretty established. Prince Navin fits kind of right into that. It being uninkable is a little tough, but the fact that you can cheat out almost anything song-wise that deck already plays, or that you'd want to play outside of the Sing Together cards, in which Navin is still going to be very helpful in that aspect, even after you play him on a following turn. I think Navin is relevant. He quests relatively well too. I think you could put him in like A tier or B tier. Like I don't want to overhype him. I mean, the stat line is okay. There's still some removal tools that can get rid of him, but like the thing is that it's an on-play effect.
Yeah.
That is just so useful and so good. I'm kind of leaning towards putting him in like niche meta usage. Only because of the uninkable tag. Like I don't know if it's going to overwrite some of the other uninkables that some of these decks really have to have and are already running, but I think you could play a couple Navins in decks. I think that's where I see it.
So it's funny you say that, because in my mind, I do think that the only thing holding this card back is the uninkable tag, but I think it's powerful enough that you make room for it. Especially in this like with Steel Song. Well, I don't know. I can see Steel Song playing 4 of these. I mean, when you think about it, like you basically get to drop this and Whole New World. You can drop this and grab your swords, right? And I think this is also the kind of card that scales with the game. They can't print a song with a cost 6 or less without everybody immediately going, oh, you can play it with Prince Navin at the same turn. Now, obviously, you know, when you play Prince Navin and immediately play a song, you're dropping 2 cards. But assuming that you have, again, and I think this is like immediately going to be useful in Steel Song, I really think they're going to make room for this, because you know you can sometimes get in these positions with Steel Song where you have to Whole New World for 5 ink and then don't have anything left on the board. Like let's say they clear your board as you play it, right? And then you go, okay, crap, like, you know, I played Ariel, I went and found a Whole New World. I've got like 2 cards in hand, right? And then they kill my Ariel with a Brawl, right? I can't play my Whole New World yet, because maybe I have 3 ink, right? So I can't sing it. And also, even if you could, let's say you had the 5 ink needed to play it, if you play Whole New World, you basically refill your opponent's hand and then give them the first opportunity to develop something. The thing that's nice about Navin is you can drop him on 4, play the Whole New World ahead of time, just like you could if you had been able to sing it with Ariel or something. And then obviously you have a singer ready to go that your opponent either has to waste resources killing or gives you an opportunity on the following turn to Whole New World again, or grab your swords, or, you know, Storm Rage on, or whatever. So I'm very high on Prince Navin. Anytime I see something that, you know, can immediately let you play another card for free, I'm like, well, all right, sign me up. And I think the 2 questing and the 3 attack, 3 defense means that while, yes, it dies to Medusa, it's not dying to Brawl, it's not dying to Baboom. This is a pretty resilient card at the 4 cost price point. So I'm like, it's at least A tier in my mind. I was going to go S tier. I was going to go meta defining.
I think it's a matter of, and it's weird to me because I don't know of a lot of 6 cost actions specifically that are like build arounds, right? There are definitely 5s. Like 5 seems to be even kind of ironically really like a stronger, 6s, like a stronger slot. We do have some new actions coming in specifically in Amber, so that way it's flexible to be able to kind of play with whatever color you're looking for, like Blast from your past, which is a super rare. Name a card, return all character cards with that name from your discard to your hand.
Yes.
Revive, which is a 5 cost uninkable action. Well, and it says no, it's not, and I guess it's
got to be a song with Navin.
Yeah, and Blast for Your Past is a song, so you could use that. But there's some other songs and stuff that you can play with it too. But to kind of refill your hand or be able to pull other things back. But I think let's put it in A for now, since it's kind of going to be our compromise. If you're kind of floating between S and A, and I'm floating A between A and B, I definitely see him getting play. It just depends on what is going to be out there proven to be strong enough to combo with him.
Right.
That's going to make him either stupid relevant or stupid relevant next set. Like, there's no way he doesn't find just an absolute bonkers 2-card combo eventually.
Let's move on to Camila Madreal. So we have our first of the 2 Amethyst legendaries. Gibby, give me a little rundown, first impressions of Camila Madreal.
Camila Madreal, I really tripped me up when you look at this card.
I know.
Bruno's face, and I was like, did they just misprint it? But I forgot he's a shape changer. So he's a 6-cost inkable, 3/7, family copycat, Storyborn ally Madrigal. Quest for 1, it says imitate. Whenever this character quests, you may gain lore equal to the lore of chosen other character of yours. Yeah. Return that character to your hand. Now, I don't think this is going to be better than other cards you could play at his slot for that expensive. Yeah. I'm just really struggling to find other cards that you'd want to play that would already be down on board, because you have to think about what is the most ideal time to play most cards on curve. And I don't know of a 5-cost card outside of something that you shift in that quests for such an amount that you'd also want to bounce back to your hand. And that you lose tempo by bouncing things back to your hand unless it's something specific. Like anything that quests hard, you want to stay on board for the idea of being able to do it again. So there's this counter synergy here of you bouncing a card back to your hand and then having to most likely wait 2 turns at minimum to be able to replay it and then bounce it again, unless it was in danger. Like it's like a really fragile card, like a Pinocchio talkative, or like a Pinocchio or a Simba or something like that.
Right.
Or like a Piglet. I can't think of a scenario where I'd really want to bounce that card back to my hand. So I'm kind of putting this in binder fodder.
I agree. I think this is binder fodder, and it's sad to say that you've got 2 Madrigals, legendaries that are both going to be, I think pretty low tier. I mean, I can see somebody splashing a 1 of this in a deck at locals, and maybe they win a game with it, but the reality is it's too slow. It doesn't at this stage in the game. You need things that do something when they come in. You're holding 6 drops are held to the standard of Tinkerbell and Madame Medusa, right? So how do you can't really justify Camilo for a slow effect on the following turn at a stat distribution that is dying to the biggest sort of barrier to new cards, which is Madame Medusa, right? Everything's held to that standard right now. And it has no supporting keywords to help it stick around. It's not like this has ward or evasive or, you know what I mean? Nothing is helping this get across that threshold. So it doesn't even have shift, you can't even bring it in earlier. And immediately, if it had shift and we could play an earlier Camilo and then shift onto it and immediately use its effect, then there's some niche, potentially rogue deck options for it. Right. But right now I'm looking at this and I'm I think it's binder fodder. I'm sad to say.
Yeah. And even if you play, if I talked about the case where you're bouncing something you already had on board, on an earlier turn, and then you played Camilo. Even if it was the other scenario, because you could technically do this where you dropped Camilo on 6 and then you dropped a 7 drop and then quested with Camilo to then bounce whatever the 7 drop was back to your hand. Are you really wanting to spend 7 ink for, we'll say on average, 4 lore and no improvement in board presence? Actually, a worse board presence because now Camilo is exerted.
Yeah.
Is that really the tempo that you want? Even that doesn't even make sense in a control deck.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. But we can move on. Let's talk Genie. So we have our second Amethyst legendary here. Genie, main attraction. Gibby, give us the rundown.
7 cost, uninkable, 5/5. He is a Storyborn ally. When this character is exerted, opposing characters cannot ready at the start of the opponent's turn. Now, I'm going to jump this over to you first, Ian.
Oh, okay.
I really don't know what to make of this card. I am kind of lost in this space. Like I've made cases in my head for both the relevance and lack of relevance of this card. Something we talked about, the only thing I will note prior to this, and this may be a part of your evaluation too, is, and I forgot to mention Quest for 2. This also has the Camila problem. That is a 7 cost card with no ability to shift.
Yeah.
And it is uninkable too. So it is, you're gonna have to wait to play it. It's gonna clog your hand if you don't have the ability to get high enough in your ink count. Do you see this making any play at all?
I do. So the thing that's interesting about Genie is, like, we can look at them as, like, yeah, both of these are expensive purple units that don't do anything when they come into play. I think there's a few key differences here. One being the 5 attack, right? So making it Medusa proof, right? But the bigger thing here is that when you play it, either your opponent has an immediate answer for it, in which case that's not great for you, or it makes them extremely nervous about what to do on the following turn, because they are going to have to either utilize their characters to quest or challenge or whatever, knowing they may not be able to ready them on the following turn. Because as soon as you do something with Genie, when it comes back to you, those guys are locked down. I think what's interesting here is if we look at this from the perspective of, like, well, is this going to be meta defining? No, I really don't think so. It's possible. You never know. Somebody might break the code. But I think the place we see Genie most often will be in some sort of, like, late game. I'm thinking like a Blurple deck. We've got a lot of other cards that are playing off of things being exerted, making it easy to exert things, easy to keep things down. I think you can find this as a control tool in a Blurple deck where they can splash 1 or 2 copies in. And again, I think the ability to, like, ramp up makes it more appealing. But keep in mind, the reason why I'm not making that argument for Camilo is if you're going to ramp and you want to get quick questing, just play Lucky Dime, right? So you don't need Camilo for, getting quick questing off of a ramp. But you do, in the specific situation of Blurple, not have a lot of ways to control the board because you don't really have AoE access. But now, obviously, you have Genie, you have this new Ana super rare. So there's some, or maybe it's just a regular rare. I think it's a regular rare. Either way, you have some more control tools. I can see this popping up as a 1 or 2 of in a top tier deck. It is not going to enable the deck, right? It's not going to be the driving factor behind the deck, probably. But I can see it sliding right here into B tier. Maybe the rogue deck, but I personally am extremely high on the concept of Blurple next format for, like, 5 different reasons. So, like, I'm willing to give it the step up out of the C tier.
Okay. Yeah. So I think there's a world where this card just wins you a game or 2 by just being the perfect storm of your opponent doesn't have the answers to be able to kill it, and the rest of its board isn't effective, or it was planning on singing a song, but it doesn't have a character to be able to do it, and it's just low tempo enough where you continue to utilize your characters. It's kind of just, it's kind of a spin cycle, right? Like it's a once you're in it, you can't get out of it kind of card. Like if your opponent sets up the conditions properly. So I think, I think niche is I'm fine with that. I think there's going to be applications. I do think it's going to be tough to set up, though.
Yeah, let's jump into another card you and I have discussed probably more than most of the other things, which is this new Ana. So jump in on this new green legendary Ana, because I think there's some really interesting design developments here.
Ana, Diplomatic Queen, Emerald character, 3 cost uninkable, 2 attack, 3 willpower, Storyborn hero queen, Royal Resolution. When you play this character, you may pay 2 ink to choose one of the following. There's 3 different options. Each opponent chooses and discards a card. So the application for if you're playing multiplayer or single player, it still will hit your one opponent. Chosen character gains +2 attack this turn. Banish chosen damage character. It also quests for 2. So you have 3 choices to use Anna with. Ideally, you're not playing her on 3. You can if you need to, just to have something on board if it's going to be a combo piece, if you're going to shift into like a big Anna or something like that, or you just need a body on board for any sort of singing of a song. But ideally, you're playing her on 5, so that way, or higher, so that way you can pay your cost and then also pay the additional 2 to get the effect off for one of her 3 effects. Mm-hmm. Something you and I talked about is that Anna is specifically great for a lower drop card because she's a great top deck. She isn't a low drop that you are afraid to find in the late game because most likely either banishing a chosen damage character, that tends to happen quite often in the late game, especially in green that has has the ability to ping a lot of things now. It's one of the major themes that got bolstered in the Shimmering Skies package for Emerald and for a little bit in Steel as well. Also discard. Discard has been very relevant in the last couple of sets and may only get better with the exception of discard losing Bucky. But discarding a card, especially when your opponent only has 1 or 2, is not a bad thing because it's also not limiting what the cards. Overall, Anna is just super flexible.
Yep. I like her for B tier as well. Sort of niche meta usage. I would not, if you were to fast forward 2 months and be like, yeah, Anna is like a staple card in X deck, I'd be like, cool, I believe you. But I'm more conservatively thinking we might see 2 copies of Anna slot in somewhere. That's like, hey, I need a couple more 3-drops in green, but I'm not really sure what I want. And I would like something that's flexible. Maybe you slot into Anna just because hey, I can jam it on 3. It's quests for 2. It's okay body, but it's the same body as, Diablo or Ursula, right? Or rather, it's the same body as Ursula Deceiver of All. Still has 2 attacks, so all of these are dying to brawl anyways. But again, when you top deck at the end of the game, it's so versatile. And the thing that I think I like about it is, giving +2 attack can really change the game. I mean, look no further than Merlin Crab, right? Giving attack sort of on play that surprises your opponent, especially since there's not really a ton of rush in green. You've got that in hand ready to go if you need it. Banishing a damaged character is probably the most valuable part of this card, especially in the late game. But if you ever can't play either of those effects, either because your opponent doesn't have a damaged character or there's nothing to challenge with the +2, you can always just still discard a card. Like you always can get the value from the effect. So I really like it. I like it not because I think it's like a staple, but because I think it's a really flexible, cool card. And I do like the design direction of like pay a little extra for an effect later, but put on a early game body. I think that's cool.
Yeah, I think something to note is if you're going to play this card in the upcoming set as your deck building, I would absolutely deck build. Like, even though it says 3 and you're trying to create like a balance in your curve, just treat it as a 5-drop. Literally just build it as a 5-drop. Like, don't count on this as a 3-drop for you to be able to play because you're going to be reluctant to, like I said, you can drop it on 3 if you need to, but just build it as a 5-drop.
Let's go ahead, and unless you have any objections with the B tier here.
Nope, B tier's fine.
Let's go ahead and move on to Clare Bell, the other Emerald legendary. Now, of note, I think we will need to talk about the fact that not only do we have this legendary Clare Bell, which is a shift, there are also 2 Clare Bells introduced, one 1-drop and one 3-drop. So there are 2 shift targets, which are both decent. But Gibby, let's walk through what is this 7-drop shift Clare Bell good for?
So 7-drop Shift 5, Clare Bell. She's got 5 attack and 6 willpower. Quest for 2. Keep up the pace. At the end of your turn, choose an opponent. If that opponent has more cards in hand than you, draw until you have as many cards in hand as them. So this card, it being a 7-drop that shifts in for 5, I like it. I mean, I think one of the biggest things about this card is that it's inkable. Mm-hmm. Like, if this was an uninkable, I would really struggle to find a place for this. Because the 7 cost is contradictory to the idea of dumping your hand and playing aggressive, being the aggressor, playing from ahead, getting out ahead of the tempo. But if you have to get rid of it to play something else on curve and to get to gain that tempo, if you draw multiple of these, you're fine with that. Mm-hmm. Like, you just ink it to maintain the tempo and hope to find one later. Or if you think you can hang on to it and you can shift it for 5 and continue dumping your hand, fantastic. It is hard to kill. First of all, it decently quests. And 5 is about where you'd want your top end to be in like an aggro, aggressive, or tempo deck, like 5 or 6. And if you shift it properly, this essentially functions as that. If not, it's ink. I like this card a lot. I'm kind of thinking this could be meta relevant. In the tempo deck, because green is also a good meta or a good tempo deck color.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a little bit of a bold prediction on our end, but I also see the value, and we'll see if this pops up immediately, because let's be honest, Lorcana players and card game players in general are always looking for the next best control deck. Okay, they freaking love control, so that's where most of the early innovation usually comes from, outside of the top players who just look for the very best thing. So I suspect people are going to overlook this card at first, but the thing that sells me on this, besides the fact that it's inkable and the shift, which is very relevant, both of the Clare Bells before it are decent, and the fact that it gets its ability right at the end of the turn. You don't have to wait to get it. So and you can intentionally dump hand size ahead of time and then refill when you're against this, ruby amethyst opponent, or you're against a sapphire steel that's playing Whole New World, and and stacking this fat hand, or using Hiram and redrawing. And so there are the best decks in the game draw a ton of cards. They typically sit on a ton of cards. Clare Bell is kind of a aggressive answer to that, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. I agree. Let's bold prediction. Let's stick it in meta relevant. I believe that there will be a deck that will be enabled by this card. Will it define the meta though? I don't think so, but I think there will be a deck that gets fully enabled by Clare Bell. I'm actually kind of interested now in like a Ruby Emerald Evasives deck that tops out with this. That could be really interesting, because that deck has no card draw. Could be interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of the bounce tool, like bouncing your opponent's cards with songs like the Mother Knows Best and some of the. Yeah, I think that is a great burst play in the early to mid turns along with this to limit your opponent's board.
And when you bounce things, their hand gets bigger,
Yeah, their hand is. I mean, that's another fantastic point. But their hand is getting bigger. You're continuing to play things off, and you're just building an unstoppable board that they don't have an answer to. Yeah, I like this card a lot.
Let's talk about Donald Duck. I need to find him on my other screen here. Pie Slinger. Very
one of the funniest arts.
Yes, by far, and has an enchanted as well, which is pretty funny too. I'm not gonna lie, I do really enjoy just how colorful these enchanteds are this set. And if I pulled a Donald Duck Pie Slinger enchanted, I wouldn't be mad at that. It's pretty funny. It just tickles my sense of humor. So I think it's pretty cool from the artistic perspective, both arts. But we're not here to talk about artwork. We're here to talk about meta relevance. Gibby, give me the quick rundown of the card, and is there any use for him that you can see?
5 cost, inkable, 3 attack, 6 defense, shift for 4. He's a Floodborn, hero and knight When you play this character, if you used Shift to play him, each opponent loses 2 lore. While an opponent has 10 or more lore, this character gains 6 attack. So he's kind of in this weird place where you're probably going to get value off of him one way or the other, whether it's like if your opponent's playing an aggressive deck or if they're not. At minimum, you're probably making your opponent lose 2 lore if you're shifting him in, and there are cheaper Donalds that aren't bad to play. When an opponent has 10 or more lore, this character gets +6 attack. Not really the ability that you'd want when your opponent has 10 or more lore, because I mean, I guess you can kill big things, right? But you're trying to stop your opponent, right? Like this is supposed to be a control tool, like a showstopper, slow your opponent down kind of card. And attack really doesn't help you do that. The lose 2 lore will, but I don't know. I think this is rogue deck potential. I could see it being like I could see a deck finding use for this, especially in like something like an Alice deck or just where it matters how much attack your side of the board has if you're comboing with like support stuff. But I just don't think this card is going to be seen in any sort of meta relevant deck.
Yeah, so I largely agree. I do not think it is going to be. If you were to ask me to put money on whether it will or won't be meta relevant, I would put it on won't. But I do think that it stays out of the D tier. 1, because there's not a lot of ways to make people lose lore. 2, there's a lot of shift target options. Right. So Donald, and none of them are like amazing, but there's a lot of them. And 3, the ability to jump up to 9 attack is when your opponent is over the halfway point is interesting for a couple reasons. 1, because it will instantly turn off all of your opponent's things like Flynn and the sword unleashed or released, and now the new Maximus, all cards that rely on having the most power on the field. And similarly, it could see use in a deck that also cares about having the most power on the field. Because if you're behind, you can catch up quickly, right?
Yeah.
And so the ability for him to like work with Maximus, work with the Snuggly Duckling, work with the sword released, I think is really, really interesting. I think that deck, as we've seen, Flynn Rider is really, really strong. And that's a borderline meta-defining card. I would argue it's a meta-defining card. This card potentially synergizes with all of the new tools that are similar to Flynn Rider, which we cannot discount their impact that it could have on the meta. So I'm agree. I think it's road deck potential. I think it's really interesting. Now, here's the one that I just don't know what to make of it. I'll be honest. I just don't know what to make of it. Robin Hood. Was it Archery Champion? I got to pull it up here. Sharpshooter. You're right. There's another archery related one.
Yes, there's all of Robin Hood is archery related. They're all very similar.
So I'll run through this one and let you tell me where you think it could be useful. Sure. So 1 attack, 4 defense, 4-drop uninkable, does quest for 2. Now, his ability says whenever he quests, you can look at the top 4 cards of your deck, reveal an action with a cost of 6 or less. Here's 6 or less again, by the way. Play it for free and put the rest in your discard. Most of the cards like this want you to put it on the bottom or leave it on the top. He dumps them into the grave, which I do think is interesting for a handful of minor reasons. But Gibby, obviously, as we've established with Prince Navin, playing cards for free is great. Even better, playing a card that isn't in your hand for free is great. Is this character great?
So, the stat line bothers me.
Yeah.
I hate the stat line on this. But I do think it is relevant. So one thing that this differs from Navin is that it says action cards and not songs. Whenever this character quests, look at the top 4 cards from your deck. Maybe reveal an action card with cost 6 or less and play it for free. Put the rest in your discard. Now, this does work with Blast from the Past. Even if when you pull this and you look at the top 4 cards, you may reveal an action card. If one of the 4 cards that you pull is Blast from the Past, and some of the other cards that you revealed are Robin Hoods, you can pull them from the discard. That is one interaction of note, because they kind of seem like they would happen at the exact same time, like simultaneously. It will work that way. The only difference between this and Navin that is really relevant is that it doesn't happen immediately.
Yeah.
There are so many things that are already teched to kill Diablos, to kill Flynn's, to kill Ursula.
Yeah.
So many other things that have a low, like a low attack stat. Even 3-drop Sisu could end up, the evasive 1/1 could make more relevant. It could be seen more relevant if 1-attack units like this are a threat to be played more often.
Right.
The ability is great, and I really want to love this card, but for an uninkable slot to then not get off any of the ability, as a 4-drop, it's really tough to justify.
I do like that it's a hero, which is sometimes useful. More importantly, it's got so many other Robins. There are some cards, this new Sherwood Forest, it will work with. So potentially if you have Sherwood Forest out, you can play this, move it to Sherwood Forest, and get Ward right away. So that's kind of interesting. I also like that, when things are being discarded from your hand, you can go and fetch something like a whole new world if you wanted to play Ruby Steel. Like, I will be experimenting with that because it seems like possibly interesting. Of course, I think, again, the problem with it is just how vulnerable it is. It's uninkable, so you can't... You either need to be playing 4 of these or like 1 or 2. Probably 2. But like, man, does it feel bad to play this and just pass back to your opponent. So it also, I think we're going to see a massive surge in Emerald Amber discard, and Under the Sea is going to hit this. I mean, can you imagine playing this and being like, yeah, I get to play a card next turn. My hand is gone, but I can play one off the top. Under the Sea.
Gone.
I just don't... I'm struggling to see this anywhere past niche meta usage. I would be leaning toward rogue deck potential. But Gibby, I'll let you talk me up to niche meta usage if you really think it's that.
I think this card is going to be good if it could be good as a response to a lack of ways to deal with it in decks that are initially in the first wave deemed meta. I would keep this in rogue deck because what's going to happen is that if meta decks are defined, or people start coming up with more like shells that they think are going to be the top styles of decks in Shimmering Skies, and they don't really include ways to deal with cheap 1-attack units like this, like we've talked about, this card will start seeing play in decks to punish some of those decks for not playing those removal tools. And then those decks will just start teching into these removal tools, and this card will cease to be relevant. Like, it's a very easy shift.
Analysis, yeah.
It's a very easy shift to make room for cards that deal with this. We've already seen it happen once, and it's good until your opponent responds in kind. Like,
I don't see this living in a top tier list consistently. So
I would have no problem slotting it if it was inkable.
True,
but
very true.
The fact, because it's a threat that will bite you if you do not deal with it. It's like Diablo, but Diablo's better. But anyway, on to the next one.
Yeah, let's talk about Merlin, legendary blue Merlin, really opening up design space in a direction that for some reason Gibby doesn't like, but we will not get into that. We will not get into that. I promised the audience. I didn't, but I'm going to make this so that Gibby can't get into this. But Gibby, go ahead and as unbiased as you can, read the card and tell me.
You got it, bud.
And tell me what you think about it.
6-cost uninkable Merlin, intellectual visionary. 6-cost uninkable 3/7 Floodborn Mentor Sorcerer. Sorcerer key tag is important for some of the broom stuff and other sorcerers that we've seen. It's one of the more exciting keywords I love to see.
I hope they do more with it.
Yeah, one of the more tags. Like I love the Sorcerer tag. Shift 5, quest for 2. When you play this character, if you used Shift to play him, you may search your deck for any card, put that card into your hand, and then shuffle your deck. Now, this is one of the newer themes that we're seeing within the Shimmering Skies cards of being able to search for a wider variety of cards within your deck, but specifically off of the back condition of you have to have shifted the card in. I think we only seeing this kind of card really, with the exception of Alma Madrigal from last set. All of the cards that are being, but it was like a mini because it had to be a Madrigal. All of the cards that are digging for pretty much a wider variety of any card in your deck are all specifically if you have to shift them in. And that's, it's a good requirement to have, right? So it's not just get broken effect for nothing. You have to be intentional about the way you're playing the card. I see this as meta relevant at minimum.
I'm going to go meta defining. Can I just?
And that's fine.
I'll just jump ahead and say I think there's no way it's not meta defining.
As someone who plays this is an effect that is very much a part of other different card games. This is not a new effect to the TCG world. This is all sorts of play. It's like a huge part of the way Pokemon operates.
Yes.
And it is a pretty big part of the way Magic the Gathering operates, from what I understand. Being able to dig for certain kinds of cards like this. So I'll let you lead the discussion with this based off of your knowledge and experience on how this affects card games like a Pokemon.
Well, Pokemon is sort of a
different environment, but
yeah, it's very different in that like everyone's deck searching 3 to 4 times per turn, sometimes more, right? Maybe 3 to 4 is an exaggeration, but up to several times per turn, right? Depending on the deck. However, in more like Hearthstone style, Magic style, board-based combat, deck search is really, really strong. Usually it is pretty expensive. Now, the thing about Merlin Intellectual Visionary is that I would argue it's actually not that expensive. It's in blue, which is a ramp color, so you know that you're going to be able to accelerate ahead of your opponent and buy yourself some time. It is also a card that, while uninkable, it can shift onto a ton of different targets, all of which are really good if paired with purple, and a handful of targets if paired with blue or just within blue. That are okay. Like they're okay. So I really can't see a world where Blurple doesn't become at least a meta relevant, consistent list. It may not be the best deck in the format, but I just can't envision, with all the tools it's getting, Merlin not catapulting that archetype up to the top, because the ability to say, okay, I'm playing into this matchup, I need this card. I mean, we all do it, right? Every meta deck has this thing where they're like, okay, I need a mulligan for my brawls because I have to kill Diablo, or I have to mulligan for this so that I can deal with that. You have all of these fantastic Merlins, Goat and Rabbit specifically, but Crab as well, which comes down on 3. There's a natural curve of like Rabbit on 4. Your opponent doesn't really want to kill it because you'll get another card. Otherwise, you shift this on 5 and go get whatever card you want after potentially singing something with that rabbit, or after potentially, challenging something with it, right? There's even a new Merlin which lets you stack your deck, also on 4 and inkable. So there's a lot of support for this card, and the ability to say, okay, my opponent's got a really wide board, they're going aggro, I'm going to shift in Merlin. I'm going to go grab your swords. This is, of course, in the situation where you're playing like Blue Steel. I'm going to go grab your swords, and then I'm going to wipe their board. Or you're playing Sapphire Ruby. I'm going to shift him in, and then grab my Be Prepared for next turn. Or go grab my Sisu, or whatever. It also is going to have this unique impact on some decks, where in Lorcana right now, you don't see people playing a ton of one-ofs. And I've actually been pretty critical of deck lists that run a ton of one-ofs. Because a lot of times they're, it's one thing when they're inkable. If you're running a bunch of uninkable one-ofs, like, bro, you're never going to find it in the games that you actually want to find it. So I personally have been very critical of that, to the point where I won a set championship with 15x4. So like, this is sort of my hill to die on a little bit. But with Merlin, that completely rewrites the narrative, because you can go and include the one Sorcerer spell book, or the one Pinocchio, or the one whatever answer you need for whatever matchup. And if you are consistently shifting in Merlin, which I think is going to be happening in a Blurple deck, you are going to be able to go find whatever random piece it is. And running random uninkables is not as much of a threat in blue decks, because you can always Fishbone Quill them away. Or now with the new Tipo card, you can just toss them away like that too. So really cool stuff here from Merlin. I mean, do you have any compunctions about S tier?
I don't, because this is the kind of card where I don't, because this is the kind of card where all you need to do is find one optimal pairing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, legitimately, what is the best scenario for this color combination to pull off of a Merlin? Whether it's an overall state, or if it's just build a variety deck that includes a bunch of different answers for a bunch of different scenarios, and just know how many copies you have of each of them. Take your time, search through your discard in your hand to realize how many copies are still in. Remember what you inked. How many copies are still in your deck? If I play Merlin, am I going to be able to find a copy of this answer in my deck? If so, Merlin is like, then you go and do that play pattern. I think Merlin rewards knowledge of your deck and practice, and is also going to be a very high skill play character.
Yeah,
to find ways out of scenarios. He's a puzzle solver deck, which I love that
for sure. Let's talk Mufasa, ruler of Pride Rock. Gibby, let's get the lowdown. And this is one of the cards I've had the most debates with people, like at my locals. Everybody has wildly oscillating opinions on this card.
Really?
Yes.
That's surprising to me.
Surprises me, but
this card to me is very good. So Mufasa, ruler of Pride Rock, 8 costs on Inkable, 4/9. He quests for 4. Storyborn, Mentor, and King. When you play this character, exert all cards in your inkwell. Then return 2 cards at random from your inkwell to your hand. Everything the light touches. Whenever this character quests, ready all cards in your inkwell. So I see you've placed this. Did you put this in Binder Fire because that's where you think it should go?
No. I've just sort of that's the staging grounds.
I was like, are we about to? We might actually have a discussion here. No. I think this card is fantastic. And it's in the right color. I think the most important part of this. Blue ramps like nobody's business. This is a super powerful effect on a very high costed character, but it is one of the biggest tempo payoffs of being able to do multiple things more in one turn than you've probably ever seen in Lorcana to this point. Being able to play it, exert all the cards in your inkwell, and then return 2 of them randomly from your inkwell to your hand. So yes, at random. So remember what you're inking, because you might end up getting it back. But the second effect is more or less the part that matters. Whenever this character quests, ready all the cards in your inkwell. So you do a bunch of things. You quest with Mufasa for 4.
Yeah.
And then you ready all of the cards. And so you can play Mufasa, drop a lucky dime. Mm-hmm. Quest with Mufasa for 4. Ready everything in your inkwell, use the lucky dime, continue to play more things, like if you're trying to close a game out, or if you need to play multiple like board wipes, like play a Medusa, kill something, quest with Mufasa, reset your ink, play a Lady Tremaine, like declare another thing. it's a comeback card. It's a big tempo card. It
Mm-hmm.
basically puts your opponent on a clock, and it's also not easily removed through a challenging or through just hard board removal. So I think this card is very much going to see play. I think it will be meta relevant.
Interesting. I think our debate here needs to be that whether or not we think it will be, how good we think it'll be. I think we both agree it's a strong card. My question has to do with, does this card usurp any of the cards in our two powerful pre-existing Lucky Dime decks? Okay. And that's where I look at, like, this is Tamatoa, right? Like, this is competing with Tamatoa or Ariel or, you know, I mean, what are you going to take out of, like, you going to take Sisu's out? No. Are you of Ruby Sapphire? You're not going to take Dragons out probably. Like, what goes? Like, I struggle with this card, not because I don't think it's great, but because I go, like, these dime decks that are reliant on items don't want this. I think this is the kind of card that needs to live in a Sapphire deck that is ramping, but isn't a item deck. It's more ramp into big things, pressure. You know what I mean?
And I do think that, I think one of the things that has made these item decks, these ramping item decks, almost a bit handicapped, if you ask me, is the fact that it has to lean so heavily into items.
Yes.
I think this opens up Blue to be able to find other optimal ways and responses to what the rest of the meta is doing for ramp players that isn't so item driven. I think overall it's harder to remove characters than it is harder to remove items with decent stat lines, of course, right? Like for the entirety of the field.
Yes.
And I think that makes these decks more resilient, and I would have no problem replacing Mufasa with Tamatoa. You can still even run Lucky Dime. Like, Lucky Dime is not a card that says you have to have 9 items on the field along with Lucky Dime. The only reason you needed that is because that's what Tamatoa's effect was. You can still splash Lucky Dime, run Mufasa, and it still be just as powerful. If the rest of your deck isn't built on having to have a million items out, they've continued to print more character cards that ramp. Yeah. So I think that's where I go. I do see an avenue for Mufasa to be played in a non-item-based ramp deck in a multitude of colors because it's based in blue.
So to that point, do you think, and this is just fitting us into our categories, do you think that Mufasa will be the key card in a new meta-relevant blue deck that is not our pre-existing item Hiram Flaversham, Lucky Dime, Tamatoa decks? Do you think he will forge an archetype that is good enough? Because that's the difference really between meta-relevant and rogue deck potential. Because I think if we were talking about splashing him into an existing deck, he would go here, right? As like, it's an option. Sure. It's a tech option. But like, that's the difference between A and C tier is, will the Mufasa deck, because I think we agree it will have to be its own thing, will it be good enough?
I plant my flag, yes.
All right, we'll leave it there then.
I plant my flag that it will create a new archetype.
Let's move on because I don't disagree. I guess I feel unsure. So I'm going to let you call the shots on that one. Let's go to Arthur, one of our steel legendaries. And a pretty, honestly, I really like this artwork. I'm a sucker for Sword in the Stone. I had that one on VHS, and so watched that quite a bit when I was a kid. So that's why I've liked all the Merlin Mims stuff. But yeah, let's get into this. Gibby, give me the rundown. What do you think about Arthur King Victorious?
Arthur King Victorious. He's a 7-cost uninkable, 3/6 in steel, Floodborn Hero King. Great keywords. Shift for 5. When you play this character, chosen character gains Challenger +2 and Resist +2, and can challenge ready characters this turn. So very on-play relevant effects. It doesn't have to necessarily play off of him. And then from there, he can then quest pretty Steel is so packed already.
Right.
And I don't know if this card usurps other cards that I would rather play, especially because I can't think of a lot of other, like, I think of the pool of pre-shifters for Arthur, and I don't think it's as strong as some of the other characters that I would rather be shifting in Steel. I think there's a deck where this could work. I'm going to go rogue deck potential, I think is where I see it. I see the use, but I think it is conditions need to be met that are very particular.
Yeah.
Especially with him being a 7-cost shift 5 and uninkable. I just don't see it making that much of an impact.
Yeah, so the thing here, and the reason I agree with rogue deck potential, is while his ability is strong, there is already a song that isn't seeing high-level play that does what he does earlier, right? Which is the One Last Hope, right? And so if One Last Hope isn't yet seeing play, I don't really see how Arthur, which doesn't have great shift targets outside of the Bounce Arthur, which is playing an aggressive playstyle, not a controlling playstyle. I just don't see where Arthur King Victorious can slot in, especially because they didn't give us any new Arthurs that were particularly great, and or were Arthurs that came down, right on turn 4. We have an actually kind of interesting 1-drop red Arthur, which is like a 2/3 reckless, kind of cool, great stats, right? Like, could be interesting. And then on the flip side, we have, a 2-drop 2/2 Arthur, 2/2/2/2 Arthur blank, in Steel. So it's like, he's not living to get to this shift. So while this card, obviously you can just play for 7, I think that's what we're talking about. Like, we're probably not shifting this card. We're probably paying full price for it. And there are other things that you can do that effect of challenging ready characters cheaper and quicker. So he's better than the D-tier, but I'm struggling to find an argument to put him any higher. So let's move on.
Agreed.
Jafar. This one's really interesting because I've seen some conversation around it being better than my initial impressions. Gibby, where are you at with Jafar, Tyrannical Hypnotist?
So this is a Jafar, Tyrannical Hypnotist, 6-cost inkable, 0/7, Dreamborn, Villain, Sorcerer. Another Sorcerer tag. Love that. Challenger +7. When opposing characters, while challenging, this character gets +7. So something to note with that wording, it doesn't have a static +7.
No. So
like it doesn't have 7 attack. It's only when it's challenging. Opposing characters with cost 4 or less can't challenge
at all. Not just can't challenge him, they can't challenge at all.
Which is a big deal. I don't know. Like, this is a card that you're going to build a deck around, and it's going to straight up win you games because the deck doesn't run removal. Something like a Amethyst Emerald that doesn't run a lot of removal but is more board centric is going to lose to this automatically because it can't slap back at this card.
I gotta interrupt and push back a little bit. I don't think this is a build around card. Like, I view this as a tech card. You know what I mean?
And not a build around card. And if I said that, let me clarify. This isn't a card you build around, but this is a deck that you would include in an archetype that just loses to other kinds of decks that don't properly have removal for this kind of a card with that run off of like strength based. If it runs cheap cards or cheap, because it's not even based off of the amount of attack that a card does.
Right,
like I've seen decks do poorly against the Captain Hook 5-cost in Steel that cards that have like 2 or less or 3 or less attack can't challenge this unit, and it just debilitates certain decks. I think this card has the ability to shut off certain decks completely, and if you can identify those scenarios, will straight up win you games.
And you can
but I
always ink it. If you identify, okay, I'm running into a deck with Sisu's, we ink it.
You just ink it. Or you expect it to kill one or two things, and that's it. Because that's the thing, is it kills pretty much anything you want it to kill one time.
Right.
But then it pretty much dies for free if they have a response unit or a rush unit. And red's very popular.
Well,
so,
yeah, yes. I mean, obviously, it would need a rush unit plus something, right? Because it's got 7. So even a Maui can't 1-for-1 this.
Assuming that you haven't already challenged anything with it, sure.
Sure, yeah. You can send multiple things into it, and then it stalled your opponent 2 actions, effectively.
Yeah, so I think this is rogue deck potential. It's kind of where I put it. I think the effects on it are very relevant and could be very good, but this is not something that I look at it and go, I can see where this just is going to create a slot and make waves.
Yeah, I'm torn between B and C tier, right? I don't think this is the kind of card that's going to like open up a new archetype, right? What I do wonder is if this is a card that is good enough to slap 1 or 2 copies in an existing deck. Like, do you slap like 2 copies in a Jafar wheel? Right? Like, I know that's kind of more of a niche deck, though. I mean, I saw some people playing it at set championships, winning some games. I heard that there was 1 or 2 that won some set championships out there, right? So like, Jafar wheel is unpopular, but it isn't dead, and it's not a meme. It's probably a rogue deck, right? At this point. But my question is, like, can you see a world where like Sapphire Steel might slot 2 copies of this in, maybe in the same way that they would slot in a Chin-Po, or they'd slot in a Simba, right? Can you see a world where that happens? Because then in my mind, it moves up to niche meta usage.
I can. Sapphire Steel, like, and I know that's not the only, like, you just used that as an example.
It's an example.
That's not, that's not the color combo that I had in mind, but there are other cards that like specifically call out if you have Jafar on the field, like the lamp.
Yep.
Too, which you like this could end up making
like
other cards more useful. Like, you create a variation of Jafar wheel that runs the lamp, because I don't think the typical one does.
Probably not.
But I wouldn't have any qualms about putting it into niche usage as this is a splash card in another deck.
Yeah, targeting a certain matchup.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I don't have.
It's a very polarizing card.
I think the effect is good enough where it's a card you'd have in your deck going into a tournament, and then you'd see their color combos and go, "This is not the matchup," and then every time it just becomes ink.
Right. And that's the thing that makes this like even a conversation. If this was uninkable,
but you're never happy. But you wouldn't be unhappy. I don't think you ever sit and look at this card and go, "I'm unhappy to have this in my deck."
Yeah,
that's the difference.
Yeah, as long as you have enough card draw to mitigate like top decking it, I think is the key there, right? If you have very little card draw, you can't afford to play cards that you are scenario based. Like, you have to play cards that are consistently powerful. But if you have enough card draw, you can afford to run inkable cards that are tech answers. So like that's where I land with that, and I could be totally wrong. It could sit and hang out right next to Gantu, which it power crept, right? But yeah, we will see. This is our Shimmering Skies Legendary Too Early tier list. Please let us know in the comments what you think if you made it to the end of the video. We want to thank you so much, and also remind you to consider subscribing. We will have plenty more videos like this coming up, and of course, jump in the Discord where you can chat about this, share your tier list, and tell us all of the reasons why Mirabel is OP. I would love to hear them, because I know I'm going to be working to win a couple enchanted versions come about October. So anyway, thank you all so much for watching. We will see you on the next one. Bye.